Times best-selling author and speaker, and this is why you should not ever even log on or watch The Reverend and the Reprobate.
He has written a new book called Men on Fire, which is part of a trio that speaks directly about manhood with Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, Building Your Band of Brothers, and Men on Fire. And so I want to start with asking you some questions about Men on Fire, how you got inspired for the book, but really, as a pastor, the question that I have that is probably the overarching theme, it seems, of all of these is how your relationship with God, how your faith influences what you feel like or what you see manliness as.
It's a great question. Let me just tell you quickly that I had written Mansfield's Book of Manly Men and also a little book I call a movement book, a book we basically sell at our events and try to feed a movement with, called Building Your Band of Brothers. And before COVID, of course, I was speaking at men's events all over the world, but there was something I was unhappy about. There was something I noticed was missing. And men who were in men's ministries, men who were in men's movements and reading books and growing, good things were happening, but there was some kind of inner passion, force, get up and take it kind of thing in individual souls that I just found missing. And so I started giving thought to what that was. I knew it was personal. I knew it was individual with each man. And that's how I came up with the 7 fires in Men on Fire. They are intensely personal. They have to do with your family, your heart, your love, your relationship with God, your friendship, the legacy you're going to leave. And so it's not just men in general and men countering the forces of this age and what have you, but it really is intensely personal. So that's why I wrote the book. And I'll tell you what, my faith helps me understand manhood, first of all, as something that is created by God. And that may sound simple, but of course, in our generation, especially in the universities that are criticizing manhood and masculinity so much, their assumption is that manliness, masculinity, is a social construct, that it evolved and was created by men for domination over the rest of the world, over women especially. And so that this is not something created by God. Now, certainly I believe there's toxic masculinity, and certainly I believe there's perversions of what true manhood is. But I start with the assumption that God made men, and many of the things that are characteristic of men are fashioned by God, that men need controlled rowdiness in their lives, that men have a unique gift for bonding together, the ways they're inspired, the power their words have amongst other people, et cetera, et cetera. All these aspects of manhood, the guardian protector motif in a man, all of that's created by God. So part of my task is to help distinguish what's godly, what's by design, and then what has just been a sinful construct that's been added on to manhood, so that manhood is in the crisis that it's in today. So that's the best answer I can give you, I think, on that one.
What are some ways that men do bring masculinity down, that we do give a bad name to that?
Well, when we use the same strengths and abilities and the power of our words that we've been given to ennoble and protect and build up and call out goodness in people, especially those we're responsible for, wives, children, friends, etc. And instead, we use it to dominate. We do use it to curse. We use it to bust people up. Any man that's ever raised a fist to a woman is engaged in toxic masculinity. He's abusing the gift God gave him of his physical strength to dominate. The power of words. Men have exceptional power of words. I remember almost everything my Army officer father ever said directly to me about me, because it was so powerful, so transforming. And so most of it was negative in the early days, and then later it became positive, and it transformed me. So when men allow what is God ordained about them to be perverted, to be deformed, their appetites, they're meant to be aggressive. They're meant to be men. Men are meant to have appetites and drives, and I believe every man ought to have some form of controlled violence, ought to be breaking a barrier of performance in his athletic life. Even if it's just mall walking for a 95-year-old guy, he needs to be pushing against a barrier. All that's God-ordained stuff. But when that becomes about doing destructive things, when the sex drive we've been given becomes about shoving 20s in some girl's underwear at the pole, or having a series of affairs, or fathering children we're not responsible for, all of that I perceive as perversion of the gift we've been given.
You talk a lot in your books and in your Great Man podcast about the necessity in your life of a band of brothers and how you put that together. And a lot of the things you just hit on, it seems like having that band of brothers in your life has prevented some of those apparent stumbling blocks from interfering and causing issues in your personal life and in your marriage, in your ministry, and in your business. How is it that men, as disconnected as we are, can continue to move forward or push towards building a band of brothers?
Yeah, it's a real important issue. And I think the first thing is men have to recognize they need other men. We aren't meant to walk alone. You know as well as I do that the male suicide rate is skyrocketing in the Western world. And in England, when they do the postmortem, the psychological postmortem, they look at the suicide notes. Almost every single time the notes say, there's not a man alive on earth that knows anything about what's going on in my life. I don't have a single male friend anywhere close. Well, they might have female friends, but their life doesn't really have meaning unless they have male friends. And when they get to a certain age, they have zero male friends. Well, then the kind of depression that leads to suicide sneaks in. So men are usually walking alone. Most men in the Western world have what psychologists call rust friends. Rust friends are like the guy who was in your wedding, but you talked to him maybe twice in the last 5 years. Guys you knew in the Army, guys you knew in college, but they faded. Maybe they're a phone call once every so often. True friends are close enough to know what's going on in your life without you having to narrate it for them. True friends care about you enough to speak into your life. So I'm a big believer in men intentionally building a band of brothers. Our modern American lives, especially, grow us out of those relationships. And eventually a guy hits middle age. He's got the house, the wife, the kids, the car, the career, and he's isolated. He doesn't have anybody he can name as a best friend. So I teach men to realize that they need to have a band of brothers. And then I teach them how to build that band of brothers, which even for the shyest guy, really, the core art is the art of the indirect connection. You put a bunch of guys, Pastor, listen up now. You put a bunch of guys in a fellowship hall and you have them all circle up chairs and look in each other's eyes meaningfully. And then you say to Bob, tell us what your emotions are today. What are you feeling, Bob? Ain't nobody coming back.
I don't have emotions.
Ain't nobody coming back next week. So what we got to do is teach guys how to have the indirect connection. Men get to know each other while they're doing something else other than getting to know each other. They're fixing the widow's house, or they're shooting hoops and having a beer afterwards, or they're whatever, going for a hunting trip, going fishing, jogging, watching the game with a hamburger in their hand, whatever. We get to know each other indirectly. And then once I teach them the art of how to get to know each other, so even the shyest guy has this under his own control, then the goal is to get with a band of guys, start talking meaningfully about what it means to really be a man, start enlisting help. And what you're going for is the free fire zone. The free fire zone is an arrangement amongst men in which anything that needs to be said to make us better will be said. Nobody's going to be, twiddling their thumbs and rubbing their hands and going, oh my God, I hope somebody talks to him. We're in each other's lives. We care about each other. We confront each other. We coach each other to our best. And that has made all the difference in my life. I'm a pretty competent guy, but I grew up as a military brat moving every year. So I was very alone. I'm also an introvert, even though I'm the kind of introvert that can do okay in front of people on stage. And I got to tell you, I was walking the first half of my life alone. And no major moral blow-ups happened because of that, but the loss of potential, the loss of my best self was just obvious. And now I walk very closely with a band of brothers, several different concentric circles of that, and it's massively different. It makes all the difference in my life. So anyway, I'm a big advocate for it and talked a lot about this in my book, Building Your Band of Brothers.